Hi, my name is Mauro Fiore. I was a cinematographer on Spider-Man No Way Home.
Hi, my name is Darren Gilford. I'm the production designer on Spider-Man No Way Home.
And this is the Go Creative Show.
Hello and welcome to the Go Creative Show, a podcast for filmmakers. My name is Ben Consoli, and today we speak with production designer Darren Gilford and cinematographer Mauro Fiore from Spider-Man No Way Home. Guys, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Clearly, a ton to talk about, and we've got a lot of questions from our audience, so I know you guys are excited about this episode. But before we get there, I just want to quickly mention our sponsor, Filmmakers Academy. Master your craft at filmmakersacademy.com. And encourage you to follow us on your favorite podcast app. Hit subscribe so you never miss an episode, as well as Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube, where you can not only hear the show, but see the show. All things Go Creative Show at gocreativeshow.com. So it is a rare situation for us here at Go Creative Show that we get to talk to both a production designer and a cinematographer together on the same show. So this is really, really exciting for us. And particularly because I want to get to the combination of the two, the collaboration between the two of you guys. You both worked together on Spider-Man No Way Home. And Darren, I'd like to start with you. As production designer, what is your collaboration like between the cinematographer and yourself?
Well, it's a critical relationship. And I had just an absolute joy working with Mauro. Our first film together. Hope we have many more in our future. But, it's a very integrated relationship. I mean, I have got to kind of conceive the sets with obviously our director and the producing team. And as we start to go through that, having Mauro's input in the conception of the sets is critical, especially light. I mean, Mauro's always talking about light. He needs light. We need plenty of light in every aspect of our sets, and making sure he's got plenty of room to work, plenty of the compositions that are going to help tell the story. And it goes down to the fiber of everything we design.
You say it with disdain, Darren. You're like, he needs light. He needs light. He needs light.
No. I mean, I want to support. I want to supply him with everything he needs and his team needs, and it's really important. That relationship is just really, really critical. So, as we're conceiving sets in the art department, it's not just about how things look and how pretty they are, but how they're going to be photographed, how we are going to be able to capture the scenes and the story elements that we need in a way that is artistic and beautiful, but also, relatively as easy as can be in a very complicated shooting schedule and in a shooting day. So it's not just designing the sets, it's also kind of helping design the production and how to make it as seamless for all the other departments as possible.
Now, Mauro, for you, I mean, like Darren was saying, you need light, you need this, you need that. So when you go on to these sets, now I know largely there's some collaboration, certainly, but I think a lot of these sets, at least in prior conversations I've had with production designers, the sets are fairly conceived before the cinematographer gets involved at some points. So when you come onto the set, when you start working with Darren on Spider-Man, are you immediately faced with a situation where you kind of have to make changes in order to accommodate lighting?
Well, I mean, the collaboration, since we have plenty of time, especially on a film of this scale, happens very early on. As everything is conceived and everything is like prevised, we're in discussion as to like how we're going to actually physically make the film. So there's a lot of interaction between myself and Darren, the production designer, and everybody in his department. If he's not able to answer my question, there's plenty of like art directors or people along the way that are there for every single question. And also, collaboration is crucial because of the fact that there are so many visual effects in a film like this that the visual effects supervisor has to be involved in every discussion, and we have to sort of like find a way for all of us to come up with a successful project in the end. So it's really just, it has to work.
Yeah. neither of you are strangers to a large-scale movie like this. But when you know that you're going to be working on the next Spider-Man, does something kind of scare you a little bit? Do you get a little nervous about anything? Do you get a little, I don't know, I mean, just knowing that you're jumping into such a huge franchise like that? Mauro, we'll start with you.
Okay. It doesn't really scare me, but I realize whether it is Spider-Man or Avatar, the amount of dedication and creativity that you have to really throw onto a project like this, and be able to react because there's changes along the way that happen. It's not like we have a clear idea of what we're doing towards the beginning of the film with the script, but then there's a lot of changes that happen, and you have to be able to interact with those changes or react to those changes quickly. So that's the part that's kind of like I have to have the energy. Not that I'm going to be overwhelmed. Everything has to be approached sort of like step by step. But that's really more of the the overcoming that I guess that slight fear.
And Darren, I saw you kind of smirk when I asked that. So I have a feeling that you're in agreement that there's got to be something you're a little bit nervous about stepping into a project like this.
You know what? I actually, if I'm not a little nervous, I don't think I'm comfortable. Like I need to be on edge a little bit as I take on these projects. I take on this job as such a privilege to work on these IPs and how passionate the fans and the people are about these movies. And I just want to do the justice to the project as they come along. So I mean, a project like this is daunting. It was my first superhero movie too, which I've been wanting to get into and dive in for a while, and this was the perfect one for me for a bunch of reasons. But it was a bit daunting. But I knew the first moment I met with John Watts, and he kind of pitched me the concept of the three Spider-Men. I was all in, and I was very, very passionate about it from day one. And assembling my team and my crew, you can't be intimidated by it. You have to, it's like eating an elephant one bite at a time. You have to kind of take it slow and let it come to you. But yeah, I think nervous is a place where I'm actually pretty comfortable at the beginning of a project. I like to be tested. I like to be, pushed. And this one was definitely at that level.
Well, being adaptable, like you said, Mauro, I mean, you guys were one of the first films to come back after COVID, and you had a major disruption. I mean, so much so that the original director of photography wasn't able to do the film. So, I mean, Mauro, you came in kind of still at the beginning, but that right there is a major point where you kind of have to be adaptable. First of all, talk to me about that call. I mean, what happened when you found out that you were going to be taken over for this, something that you weren't intending on doing, you weren't even booked for? I mean, what kind of feeling comes over you when something like that happens? Well,
it's a very interesting story because in a lot of ways, the crew was already hired on the film. So the whole camera department sort of started the film with the other director of photography. And all of a sudden, they were without a job. So the first they see, Bill Coe, I can say his name, Bill Coe, recommended me to the producers as an option to, we had worked together in the past and we had a really great experience. So he recommended me to the producers on the project, and the producer said, well, we'll put him on the list, but you will get him in there. All right.
No promises.
So, So that's where my story kind of begins. And then I knew that if I wanted to do the film, I had to be one of the first people that interviewed, because it was going to happen right away. John's such a nice man to speak to, and he's so excited and so down to earth, and his approach that was a really great interview. And it was very important for him that he really had a good time on the project, and that things moved smoothly and everybody got along, and there wasn't any screaming, and it was that was very crucial to him. And
but now, sorry to interrupt, but I'm curious specifically about the fact that you referenced the fact that you had a lot of time on a film like this. You have a lot of time. my guess is that a lot of that time was kind of cut short because of when you first got involved. I mean, were a lot of the preparations done before you even, I mean, you said the crew was booked. So like, how do you kind of jump onto a project where a lot of the prep has already happened?
Well, the crew was booked, but not necessarily, like, obviously they left it up to me as to, once I was hired, who are the people you want to work with. And so I decided to really hang on to the crew because they had already started working. They had already started building, and preliminarily already started on the project. So I just say a lot of time, because as the more time that you have, the more you're able to like adjust things and make things clearer. And so that time, it seemed like a lot of time, but eventually it turned out to be like not enough time because of the fact that, those changes that are made and those sort of like tweaks and story points and assembling of the final script, all that time was spent sort of like reacting to those changes, major changes that happened along the way. So that's, I say plenty of time because like, a film like this compared to, let's say, one that I had been on right before that, which was like in Morocco, $10 million film, was like you had 3 weeks prep and we're filming. So, there's a little bit more involved. That's what I mean by that.
How did this sudden change affect you, Darren? I mean, not only obviously COVID coming through and stopping production, but then having the cinematographer be swapped out.
It was pretty seamless from our standpoint, but I got to give Mauro a lot of credit. I mean, I don't know that many DPs that would be that accepting to taking on an entire crew that most people he hadn't really worked with before. But a lot of these people were committed. They had rented, apartments and this is the show they had taken. And Mauro obligated or respected that. And I think that was an amazing choice. And it kind of spoke to his character right away. And I thought that was a really noble thing to do right out of the gate. But yeah, I mean, it's it was great to have Mauro. I mean, I remember there was that kind of interstitial time where we had lost Seamus and we were kind of floating a little bit blind. And it was great when Mauro came in, because as soon as he came in, we could confirm a lot of decisions and just make sure we were on track. And he was really amenable to everything we had done, and he seemed to be excited and enthusiastic about the project, and it was great. He came in. It was a breath of fresh air for us and got us going right away. But I mean, to speak to some of the things that Mauro was talking about, I mean, there was a tremendous amount of changes that were happening, not only from story, character, but just the philosophical,
because of COVID shutting you down. You're saying
because of COVID,
yes,
and because and that's definitely related to what Seamus stepped aside. But I mean, our whole philosophical approach originally was going to be a significant location movie, a lot of locations in New York, around Queens. All of that had to change, and we had to absorb all of that into our studio footprint. So those are big changes. Those are huge changes to have to figure out how to accommodate and make work. And we took advantage of every square inch of the studio that we could. I mean, we were building in alleys and exterior sets that we'd build through the elephant doors that would go into the sound stages. We would change over sound stages. Every stage got turned over at least once, maybe even a couple of, maybe even 3 times. Huge backlot builds that were torn down and then rebuilt. So it was a very complicated show. And again, I think because of COVID, we had this incredible crew led by John Watts and his kind of approach and his demeanor. And I think everybody had a tremendous amount of respect for each other. We know we were working through a really, really difficult period in our industry. We definitely felt like we were on the cutting edge of helping to establish and figure out how to kind of get through this new production paradigm. And there was just an incredible amount of compassion and patience on a crew that I'd never seen before. And a lot of that came from Mauro and his department.
And Mauro, now, coming into a project that had intended on being on location for quite a bit of it, and then now kind of putting it into your studio environment, is that something that is more appealing to you? Do you prefer having the control of a studio, or do you kind of like the on-location stuff?
Well, I actually like the on-location stuff because sort of like the lack of control is interesting. Sometimes there's sort of like surprises that happen. that you really didn't think about on the studio. And so even sometimes reacting to changes, there are some beautiful things that happen naturally in sort of like the real world. So even though it's much more difficult, I would say, they're both difficult depending on, the scale, the scope. But location work is something that for sure that I prefer, bottom line. If we have to do it in the studio, it's really all about like, what are the things that make it look as real as possible? And you're working very hard to make those sort of like situations that sort of happen in front of you. Obviously, when you dedicate like, a week to a sequence, it's a little bit easier to control in the studio environment. But then when you take that studio environment and you make it outside the studio, you have the same sort of like, not restrictions, but same problems that arise. But so for me, it's a challenge to work in the studio, but an interesting challenge. You really have to put a lot of work into, the specific little details, and hopefully you don't leave anything out. Things that sort of naturally are there in the world.
Is your philosophy just in general to always make the studio sets as real as possible, even if you're living in kind of these fantastical, places? Certainly, like you did in Avatar, in Spider-Man as well.
Well, no, I think it depends on the project. I think it's all dependent on what the director's initial conception of the film is. If he wants it to be stylized, then that's an approach. Or, for John, this film, the thing that he kept repeating to me is that, realism. He wanted it to be real. And that's reflecting even on the sets, basement sets. He really wanted this realistic world that was really important to him. So we react on that vision, or, the concept has all to do with that sort of statement that the director establishes.
Let's talk about one of those sets, Darren, and in particular the Sanctum Sanctorum set that I know that both of you guys had a hand in for sure, and it was something that, Darren, you thought would be interesting for our audience. Talk to me about that. Why is that one of the ones that you feel not necessarily the best about, but something that you wanted to bring to our show today?
Well, I think the Sanctum, the Sanctum was such an important part of our story in so many ways, and obviously it's got a lot of history in the Marvel universe, in the Avengers movies and Doctor Strange, of course. And Charlie Wood, the production designer on Avengers and Doctor Strange, conceived the original foyer, which we rebuilt. We knew we were going to do it differently this time around. We wanted to have a significant weather event. It ended up being snow, a big blizzard. A portal had been opened and left open upstairs, which kind of was the leading art direction for all the snow and the direction of the snow. So we had to rebuild that set, and I think Marvel's rebuilt that set 3 or 4 times now. But our version had to be waterproof. Obviously, we had a lot of snow effects and water effects, so we had to kind of customize it for that. But the exciting part was going downstairs for us. That was a new set, and that was kind of conceiving what the Sanctum could be in this kind of underground, undercroft, layer ancient chamber. And that was wide open for us. And so it was a new dimension on kind of Doctor Strange, a little bit into his personality. And there was a great joke to be had there. We wanted to go down there and turn on the lights, and the first thing you feel like is you're in your grandma's basement. With the Christmas decorations and and all the decor you'd find in a very kind of typical, kind of New York underground kind of basement. And then as you work your way through it, you kind of realize that there's a big aperture, and it's opening up into a really ancient space, this ancient chamber, which kind of for us grounded the Sanctum Sanctorum in New York. So the whole idea was this ancient chamber was found by the monks way back when New York was first being built, 5 Points. And so the idea was that was kind of the anchor point for why they put the Sanctum in that specific spot. So that was just a really fun set to do. And conceiving that with Mauro, we had a few big sound stages. That was one of our biggest sound stages at Pinewood, now Trilith. And the sight lines were really important. We wanted to take full advantage of some height. So coming down from the staircase, coming down into the basement, and then keep coming down lower and lower. So there's a significant elevation drop from when you first kind of come down the first staircase into the basement and then down into the ancient chamber. And then just how we framed it and how we wanted to make it very cinematic, and the aspect ratio when you look down into the ancient chamber, which becomes kind of the jail cells for all of our villains later in our story. But it was just a really, really fun set to do. It was tricky. It was a full, complete set ceiling. We designed this amazing roll-away ceiling so the whole piece could kind of come away and could be lit from the top. We had little pockets. What's one of the things Mauro and I discussed early on was how do we get some light into this cave-like structure, and kind of opened up a couple holes and a couple gaps and working with Rosemary Brandenburg, our set decorator, and a couple light sources, and how we were going to light this very dark kind of, undercroft set. So
yeah. And I'm curious about that as well, because Mauro, you see the designs, you're going to be underground, a new environment that we haven't seen before. So there's not necessarily a reference for it. You can kind of, it's a blank canvas for you. Talk to me about how you kind of worked with Darren to make, his vision of that set into something more conducive for filmmaking.
Well, I mean, that set was very interesting because it was very challenging, because the discussion was, conceptually, it's a dark environment, and that's always the most difficult. When people want to sort of like see a dark environment and they write it, we have to be able to see it somehow. But yet it's a dark environment. And it always bothers me when it's so bright in a scene and everybody's pretending like it's dark. But it's a huge challenge. One of the biggest challenges is to create darkness. It's not only to create light, but to create darkness.
Why?
Because you want to be able to see in that darkness. Otherwise, why are we there? And you want to be able to see these characters. So the challenge is being able to see the characters and not make it look like, you're in the middle of a supermarket. So the challenge there was like, what is the color of that light? How could we get any light in there? Because it was a solid set. So with Darren, we worked really hard along with the gaffer, Josh Davis, and, trying to carve out space and trying to find little spaces that we could just sneak light in just to light the set a lot of times. Really just to light the set. Because you still have to light the set, even if you want it to be dark. You want to be able to see things in the background. You want to be able to see things in the foreground and play with that foreground background as a sort of, to compose things. So it was a very challenging, and we spent a good 2 days pre-lighting that set where we tried a bunch of things out. And John was there, actually. John came to the pre-light because we wanted to make sure that it was, dark, and he should be involved because I'm obviously new to the project, and I want his sort of interpretation of what it looks like because I'm the one coming into his world. So we have to be able to find it together as opposed to me forcing somebody into something. So it was quite challenging. But, I think in the end, we did achieve something that was pretty interesting and, gratifying.
Well, what was one of the more innovative ways that you brought light into that space? Because Darren had mentioned that you did have an actual ceiling that, you were able to open on occasion, but still you have a ceiling to contend with. So can you bring up one or two challenges of that set and how you overcame them?
Well, a lot of times, sure, we could light the whole thing from the ceiling, but it looks like you lit the whole thing from the ceiling. So, you know what I mean? It's not a boxing match. So I didn't want it to look like a boxing match. That only the center of the whole, cavern is sort of this cellar is lit only by the center of the room. So the challenge is how do you show something that's deep in the cellar? How do you light something that is like a cell or a jail cell that's deep into the cellar? How do you light that and be able to see it without any light source? There are no practicals. So we came up with, carving, because the set was, I don't know if I should say the set is made out of foam. I don't know if we want to get into that detail.
Sure.
Darren.
Why not?
I didn't carve it out of stone.
No. It looks like it, though.
Good.
So a lot of...
You can give away all sorts of secrets on this show. We're among friends. People will keep it quiet.
So we had to like actually cut into, the foam to get some light sources to just rake the edges of things that are in the depth.
What kind of light sources are you putting in there?
Just like LED strips.
Darren, sorry, we're speaking over you. What were you about to say?
I was going to say one of the ingenious things that Mauro did was indirect lighting on the inside of the cells because we had to have like a force field that kind of kept our characters in their cells. And there was a very soft kind of rim light around the edges that were buried with LEDs that kind of helped with visual effects and kind of helped that force field kind of put in. But it was just enough edge lighting to help kind of define the spaces of each one of those cells individually.
What were the LEDs you were poking or carving spots for in that foam wall?
Well, they have ribbon LEDs, which are a series of LED lights in a ribbon that you can, it's sort of like a piece of tape that you could put in different places. But, all of this, the technology on a film like this is so interesting because everything is on a dimmer and everything must be programmed. So you're able to recreate it later. And so there's an incredible amount of pre-rigging before we even get there. So we can, work the environments and turn things off quickly and change the color of things within seconds. It requires a huge amount of pre-rigging and programming of those specific units that are all in those specific parts of the set. So that is like a part that a lot of people don't know about. And I think on this film, more than anything else for me, is LED technology has changed so much and has brought something so interesting to the industry because of those rapid changes and computerizing all your lights.
Yeah. And I'm glad you mentioned LED because we have a question from Warner Image on Instagram asking if you used any of those LED walls. This kind of the green screen replacement where you have the actual scene or whatever, your background plate on the wall. Did you use any of those on the film?
No, we did experiment with those at the beginning of the project. We did do a test, but we ended up not being very happy with that test, and we wanted to have a sort of like stronger light sources. And the LED panels are definitely great for ambience and sort of like soft light sources. But the minute you're trying to recreate the sun, it's not possible. Because basically whatever that screen emits is what is projected on the actors' faces. So we ended up, not doing any LED walls. I have used LED walls in past projects, and Darren's used them as well. But this one it didn't work out. It was just not the right tool. I tried, but it just wasn't the right tool.
How do you incorporate LED walls into your workflow, Darren? I know you didn't use it on Spider-Man: No Way Home, but as from your standpoint as a production designer, how do you incorporate them, or why? What would a situation be where you said this is perfect for an LED wall?
Well, I did a project before LED walls existed called Oblivion, where we did a front projection, a full-on front projection, 22 synced projectors for Sky. It was for a Sky Tower set, so it was up in the air. So that was the perfect application because it was illuminating the set. Everything was in camera, and it was all soft clouds and soft weather. It wasn't hard architecture and hard right angles and lines that would have to kind of line up. So that was like a perfect situation for something like that. We use them nowadays for a lot of car insert photography and things like that to get a lot of motion going by. I haven't jumped into the full Unreal Engine project yet, where we're actually designing foreground set pieces to be completely in front of a full digital wall. Something I'm very interested in doing, but I just haven't. I haven't had a project that quite needed that level of or that technique yet that was relying that heavily on that.
Yeah. We've got a general question about lighting from Blake Studwell on YouTube wanting to know, and this is probably for both of you guys, but we'll start with you, Mauro. Are you concerned with motivating light, or is it more about what looks best for you?
Well, again, I'm reacting to, the director wants to shoot a realistic looking project. Not necessarily. I mean, I don't necessarily. So really, that sort of like conceptual springboard should be the motivating sort of like conception of any kind of lighting. In other words, if the director wants realism, then we must motivate the light sources, because that's what realism is about. Showing light sources and having it look like it's in the scene, and making things look like the lamp that's in the shot is lighting the actor as opposed to a movie light. So I think it's all has to do with the concept of the film.
Let's take a moment and talk about Filmmakers Academy, and a course that is near and dear to my heart. It's called Commercial Directing Masterclass, and its trainer is Jordan Brady, who you guys already know, I'm sure, from his podcast, Respect the Process. Jordan, I'm two podcasters. First of all, how are we going to keep this brief? But we'll try.
We'll try. You've upped the ante. You've upped the game here, because this is video, and no one told me. And it's a good thing I'm naturally handsome. I don't have a bad side. You could shoot me from the left or the right, but we're not here to talk about that. Commercial Directing Masterclass is basically a deep dive into how to manage your career as a commercial director, whether you're starting, whether you've been doing spots for 10, 15 years. I give you secret voodoo tricks to manage a career, run the set, and get the most out of your performers and your script. I would say that the real key, though, you get is the behind the scenes, where you watch yours truly interact with the ad agency and the actors and the crew. Because those are the three plates that you're kind of juggling, right? The agency hired you. You want to collaborate. The actors are your mouthpiece, and the crew, they do the bulk of the work. So you have to keep all those moving parts flowing.
Commercial directing is such a different beast, and that is why I absolutely love this course, and I know you guys will as well. The whole course is available now. Check it out for yourself, filmmakersacademy.com. Let's talk about the rooftop scene when all of the Peter Parkers meet. We've got a question from Logan Astrup on YouTube, wanted to know how you approached that scene. And Darren, we'll start with you.
Well, we started conceptualizing artwork really early, and it was, and I'm still amazed that we were able to keep that as secret, for as long as we have. I mean, it's a testament to how diligent the production was about protecting that concept. But we started with lots of different concept art about how we were going to get these three characters together in lots of different ways, and how we were going to first kind of, how we were going to reveal them. Ended up being at the high school. We ended up building that as a set. We ended up having a stage 14, which was kind of our catch-all stage. So it was tons and tons of smaller pieces of sets that we could wheel in and wheel out under a pretty complicated lighting package. And that was probably the biggest set. It was that we wheeled into that configuration. It was three large pieces that made up the high school rooftop. And we kind of conceived it from what the existing high school in Queens is, but it's kind of a stretch as far as a little bit of a cheat, just to kind of make sure the proportions worked for the three characters, and how they worked on the bell tower, and how they kind of came out, and where they were kind of all how we kind of composed them in that one specific set. But it was a pretty traditional, straightforward set. I'll let Mauro speak to it a little bit more about how he ended up shooting it.
Yeah, I mean, how did you light it, and how did you approach that scene?
Well, one thing Darren did mention is we moved that set outside once as well. So,
you did?
Because yes, John was really adamant about things looking realistic, and he sort of, and I sort of got connected to I understood, like, we want things to be, if we're supposed to be outside, then we should put the set outside as well. So that set, when we did a day exterior, which we see at the beginning of the film, when sort of like Dom is laying back, they're laying down and they're sort of like talking about. So that was outside, and then so we brought it inside again. As far as like how I approached that set as far as like when the 3 Spider-Men came to, I just went for it. I went for style. I just went for really stylized lighting. I didn't really, because it was going to be outside at night. And I felt like it was one of those moments where it was such a sort of a breakthrough for everybody to see all those characters that I kind of treated it very much like in a classical sort of like, this is like a Roman sculpture. And we should, be able to see everybody and, with darkness, and everybody has their light. And that's kind of the way I approach it.
I love that.
That was an amazing week, too, when they all showed up, when we had all those actors together. It was a pretty special week. Mauro,
I can't believe that stayed a secret.
I know. Mauro, did we have the shield, the fallen Captain America Statue of Liberty shield? Was it on the right side and then the high school's on the left side on stage 14 when we did that? I think we did them together.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think the shield was on one side of this.
Yeah. So we had this basically just to try and keep a lid on what we were doing. We had those two set pieces where those 3 actors were going to be on. And so we kind of jammed them into one sound stage so we could try and control it the best we could, coming and going on anybody with any knowledge of what was going on. So yeah, we had the high school next to the shield, which was a crazy week. I just remember walking into that stage and seeing those 3 guys in their chairs, waiting to roll. It was just like all in their uniforms, and it was just like crazy. Yeah.
It really is.
Yeah.
I want to talk about use of green screen in the film, and particularly how that gets sort of put into production design. I mean, are you also involved in the design of what is going to eventually be on those screens?
Yeah.
So talk to me about kind of the way, Darren, you approach incorporating so many visual effects, so much green screen in a film like Spider-Man.
Well, I come from visual effects. My background is visual effects. So I used to be an art director at a visual effects company called Digital Domain, which is where Kelly Port, our visual effects supervisor, where I met Kelly almost 20 years ago. So I come from that world, and I, very early in my career, I saw the need for designers that could kind of bridge the gap between traditional construction, traditional set construction and visual effects design. So that really interested me. So I'm always designing for that. And to me, that's really, really critical from a design standpoint, that there's a continuity between the sets, the physical sets, and that you don't even understand where the lines blur and cross over into visual effects. It's a big pet peeve of mine when I can kind of see 2 different designs of a movie, the physical design and then the visual effects design. It's really important to me that those are integrated. So, we try and build as much as we can. We want to give the director, the DP, the actors as much physical scenery that they can react to as possible. It's not always the most, efficient way to go about filmmaking. So we obviously rely on visual effects when we can, or when we know that it's going to be such a massive extension that there's just no way that it's going to be cost effective to build, or we just don't have the time or the space to build. So all those factors go into it. How much of the percentage of a scene is going to be done on a process screen. But we always try and make sure that the DP and the director have an understanding of what they're going to see when the set falls off into that blue screen. So whether it's concept art or it's 3D models, I constantly grab Mauro and be like, "Hey, Mauro, here's my model. Here's, I'll rotate around the set. Here's the physical set that we're gonna have for on stage. Here's where the extension's going to be." Working with Kelly Port too. I love to make sure all the assets and all the builds that are coming out of my department is a pipeline that goes right into visual effects as well. So whether we're doing cruder models, but the basic proportions and the basic concepts are there, and then we get handed off to visual effects to flesh out, I like to make sure that the art direction at least is controlled as much as I can within my department.
Yeah, and Jamie Dickinson on Twitter is asking about the way you light for green screen, Mauro, because do you know ahead of time? And it sounds like you do. Darren just explained, but can you talk to us more about how do you prepare yourself so that you know exactly what's going to be on those screens and you can light accordingly?
Well, again, we work with previses, which is a big help because we kind of have an idea, some sort of idea of what's going on in the background. Because I simply have to react with what's going on in the background. Otherwise, it doesn't look like it's the same environment. So when lighting blue screen, you have to find those interactive moments, sort of like tricks along the way that convince you or try to sort of steer you in sort of sleight of hand that you're looking at something that's, foreground only. And you're trying to make that environment together, sort of correlate the two environments. So every aspect of blue screen has to do with interactive lighting for me. I have to always try to find what it is that's going to make those two environments go together.
Is there a way that you can see some kind of a representation active on set, like in your monitors? I feel like I've seen stuff like that online where you can see, they'll have a camera set up and they just throw, it doesn't look perfect, but they'll throw the background in there just so you can get an idea of what's there in your monitors. Is that technology you guys are utilizing?
We did on Avatar when it was first sort of introduced, something called Simulcam. So in your camera monitor, you'd actually see that environment that's going to be recreated digitally later. So those two environments are interacting with each other was very important on Avatar because foreground characters had to interact with whatever was happening outside the room or outside the window. So it was a technology that was really important. And then on another film I worked on called Real Steel, where it was, I don't know if you guys saw it, but it was about fighting robots. And all the sort of motion capture of the robots and all the fights were done beforehand and cut together. So when we went to location, we could play back whatever was motion captured in our monitor and do the tilts according to that background. So we could actually have a live mocap inside our camera that was just basically capturing plates. It was, an environment. It was like we recreated the boxing ring, but there was nothing in the ring because it was all done, all done beforehand. So it was like a technology that was really important for those two projects. I'm not necessarily sure that we had that kind of need or necessity on this project that had to be, that needed that kind of technology.
I want to talk about the camera and lens package for the film. What did you shoot on?
We shot on the Alexa LF, which is a large format sensor, about 4K of resolution, and we shot RAW. And we also utilized Panavision lenses called Panaspeeds, all prime lenses, ranging from 100 millimeter all the way down to 21.
Was that a decision that you had made? Because I know you came onto the film a little bit late in pre-production. Was that a decision you made or something that you had gone through testing or?
Well, preliminarily, they had already sort of booked the LF and Panaspeeds. But I did go through a series of, I looked at the tests that they had shot, and it really didn't do me any good. I really still needed to approach it myself. Yeah. I'd never worked with these lenses before, so I was really curious about using them. So, I devised the test very early on in production that I could test all these lenses, and I found them very interesting.
What did you like about them?
I really like the sharpness and also sometimes how it fell off. The depth of field of the lenses, the bokeh of the lenses was very interesting. The long end of the lenses were quite interesting in their bokeh. And I also really loved the speed because they're very high speed lenses, all the way up to you could T14, which is amazing. And so when a lens is that sensitive, usually they put the best technology towards those lenses because you have to think it has to work in that big of an aperture. So the whole plane of the lens must be able to have a good focal plane. So that was interesting to me as well. And it turned out to be, I did carry some zooms at the beginning of the project, but this was very much a film that we dedicated specific lenses for specific use. So we kind of stayed off those zooms and really stuck to primes.
How many cameras did you roll?
We had a total of 3 cameras, but we we rolled 2 cameras always. And we actually had 4 cameras, I'm sorry. But so the Alexa LF, because of the technology, can shoot high speed. So we also carried a mini LF, which is a much more portable version of that camera. But the mini LF is not able to do anything past 30 frames per second. So I thought it was important to have a camera that was able to do more than 30 frames per second. That's why we chose, 2 LFs and 2 mini LFs as opposed to all mini LFs.
Yeah. I was just thinking about, filtration. I want to talk, are you throwing any filters on these lenses as well? Or did you like them right out of the gate?
I usually don't like the filter that much because I feel like, it's a strange sort of thing that you have between the audience, this gauze. I'd rather do it with lighting. Maybe that's kind of like what my background is in, but I rather sculpt the face as opposed to like filter it. And I feel like filtering it sometimes just kind of like, I feel like I'm cheating or what am I doing? But it's just a personal thing. I'm not saying like, so I really didn't do that much filtration.
Are you tinkering around with the lenses at all though? Or did you just like them as is?
We did have them detuned quite a bit. So, the edges would fall out of focus a bit more and it didn't look so clinical. Yes.
Well, I think it also contributed to the realism, those lenses, because you really are bringing a lot of realism to a show that has tons of special visual effects. I think it was a nice choice. And Darren, how important is the lens and camera package to you? Is that something that you think about when you're designing your sets, or do you stay out of that?
It's not a huge factor for me as much. I'm more about making sure the aspect ratio and framing for all the master shots, and the sets can be shot and can kind of, the masters can kind of be established. And then obviously all the detail going in and picking off all the angles inside. But I usually approach most of the sets from all the masters and just trying to make sure that I'm not boxing a DP into something that he can't quite capture and get wide and kind of understand the scope and the space and the proportion that we're in.
When you have such beautiful sets that are so detailed, and obviously there's so much money and budget and time going into these things, do you tend, Mauro, to shoot a little bit more closed down so you can see them and have a little bit more crispness in the background? Or do you like to just kind of go with a softer background? I know you had mentioned you love those lenses because they went up to T4, T2. In a show like Spider-Man with so much set design, so much art direction, do you tend to, close up a little bit?
Well, I just think it depends on the scene again. Like if it's something that we really, for instance, the scene that in the diner when sort of Peter goes back and tries to sort of recapture their relationship and nobody knows him and he recognizes him anymore. I thought it was really important to have shallow focus. So I think all of those sort of like choices are made according to the story as opposed to, like whatever maybe. But, there are times, let's say, that I remember there was a time where like even the conceptual art of, the rooftop that Darren had already drawn really influenced the way that I shot the scene. And, even made me like suggest things to John constantly about how we should stage it because I wanted to see that space and I wanted to. So I think it's all, story driven.
Darren, be honest. Does it kill you when you put so much effort into a scene and the whole thing is shallow? You must be like, God damn it! I just want to see the work I put in.
No, honestly, it doesn't. You have to approach as a designer, as an art director, you have to approach everything that everything could be seen, and you have to be prepared to show everything. But you don't. To me, the best stuff is the suggestive stuff. I don't expect everything to be seen in every detail. I just want to give the DP and the director that choice. I want them to be able to look into any corner, any pocket that they want to. But it's all about the story. It's all about servicing the story. And Mauro's so right. It's all about scene by scene, shot by shot, what needs to be conveyed to tell the strongest story possible. If that means things go soft, that's totally fine by me. As long as the essence is captured, that's all that we strive for. You do you plan everything to being shot that it's never going to happen, and you just want to make sure you give your team the best stuff possible so they can make the best movie possible.
We've got a question from Logan Astrop wanting to know how you approach that opening tracking shot of the apartment at the beginning of the film. And I'm going to ask you both, but I want to start with you, Darren, on the way you approach designing a shot like that.
Well, to be honest, that shot was not the conceit of the set. The set was kind of came together from an amalgamation of a few different historical pieces of Spider-Man movies, and from Endgame, I believe. I believe at the end of Far From Home, they definitely moved apartments conceptually after the blip. So we had only gotten a snippet of what the apartment was, and we had to kind of extrapolate from that. We had Peter's bedroom because that had been established, but the rest of the apartment really hadn't been established. So we kind of recreated that from scratch. We knew the different beats of the story. We knew they were going to come in through the window. We knew the gag. We were going to see Happy Hogan and Marissa, or Aunt May's character, kind of being introduced in that scene. But I believe it was after the set had kind of been designed and we kind of laid it out that John kind of reverse engineered with Mauro that tracking shot of running around the apartment, going from window to window, and all those different story beats. They were all scripted and written, but how it was all kind of stitched together was kind of after the fact, probably after the set had been built and been walked by John and Mauro, I would assume, when they kind of started to figure out that piece.
Yeah, Mauro, why don't you tell me from your perspective how that scene came together?
Well, it was going to always start with, Tom coming through the window with MJ. And then, we were going to eventually, John just came up with this idea that he wanted it all to be handheld. So it was one long take, one long shot, sort of like the sequence is we start at the door and we travel all the way to the bedroom to experience it. The same as Aunt May's experiencing it, and Happy's experiencing it as well. So we're discovering it as an audience the same way everybody else is. And so we did several takes, and there was just one long sort of handheld shot that we wanted to really create an energy that he was able to go through the apartment, and and we originally didn't plan on like Darren is saying, we didn't actually pre-light that, but when the director has a sort of instinct like that, it's great to follow it because exciting things happen. As opposed to fighting it and what am I going to do? When there's a great energy, you follow that energy, and that's what that was all about. Now he's going to open that window. What happens? What's outside the window? I'm not sure. So there's a bright light. There's sunlight. There's even a helicopter outside the window. So we just kind of threw it all together as exciting as we could make it, all one handheld sequence.
I imagine camera movement plays a giant role in Spider-Man. I mean, it's all about moving around, not just in action films in general, which is certainly true, but there is a certain movement to Spider-Man that you kind of have to capture cinematically. Can you talk to us about the way you approach that?
I mean, I think we, again, it's shot by shot and conceiving things a lot of times it's really how trying to find that specific scale of what we're doing. How do we show that? Because in a blue screen environment, what is the lens that's going to make us feel the most like we're in a real location? So camera movement, it's not something that was so literal. We tried not to be so literal about camera movement, and we kind of stayed away from those sort of push-ins that a lot of people do on characters. We didn't really. We really let characters sort of play in that field as opposed to really restrict their movement and try to manipulate them in any way whatsoever. Of course, scale. We did several crane shots, and that's part of the film. And how are you going to show scale on a film like this? Is you create these crane shots and drone shots and exciting camera moves with high-speed camera cars, and as much of that as you can add to the action makes it look much more incredible and is sort of like, interactive.
Let's discuss the high bridge sequence. I know, Mauro, this is something you wanted to talk about for sure, and I'd love to get Darren's input as well, but we'll start with you. I asked at the beginning of the show, is there a particular scene, something maybe that's more challenging that you want to discuss? And this was the first thing out of your mind, and I'd love to hear why and, how you approach that sequence.
Well, it was really challenging because basically, we didn't have a high bridge. We had a parking lot with, in Atlanta with changing weather conditions and, a blue screen, a massive blue screen. And, we have sun that moves on that blue screen. And, and Darren had to create like the ground of that highway, which was like massive. How long was that ground? I think it was like something, what is it, like 500 feet? I don't remember.
No, it was about a football field. I think about 300. Yeah.
Okay, so it
was big. It was big.
So it's 100 yards of like, cement, grooved cement that he had to kind of recreate, the top of the high bridge. And so you set that all up and now you're like, okay, we have nothing. We're not really at the high bridge. How are we going to do this? So the challenge is like, how are we going to spend the whole day filming and, sort of like really planning with the first AD of like what you're doing at a specific time of the day and be able to use the sun so it doesn't look like, from one shot to the next that it's like a disaster and it doesn't look like the same day. So the challenge for me was to make that look, realistic, like we're actually, and the visual effects were amazing in that sequence. I thought he did an incredible job.
Yeah, Kelly.
And all of that, obviously and also Kelly, the visual effects supervisor, was crucial even in pre-production with light studies and providing me light studies as to what the sun was doing in a specific location and, downloading that. And we designed things around, those specific things. So I thought when I saw the film, I was convinced I was in the high bridge. That's why I say that was the sequence. I mean, that's really the reason.
Well, what is something that you do? And I know you said it was particularly challenging, but I'd love to just get a little bit of like, maybe was there something that you did to give it that realism? I mean, you're outside, so you have the benefit, or I guess detriment, of having real life around you. But are you just sort of, working with the sun, diffusing? Are you like, what's your approach to a scene like that?
Okay, so like a lot of things, what I like to do is work with the sun. So we kind of like stage all the scenes around the sunlight. What specific direction are we shooting in a specific time of the day? So I try to map out the whole day according to what the sun is doing and which direction we're looking. Sometimes it's challenging because you may be looking in a direction I don't want to look at, but we have to find ways to sort of like approach it and find, so the real, it takes so much planning and like everybody being involved, with, because eventually we have this previs to work with, and that's like, this sort of like video game quality of the sequence that everybody agrees to shooting and everybody loves. So we're gonna make them. We understand what we're shooting already. So by breaking those specific little shots from that previs together, we're able to really program our day, and try to be successful to a certain point to get the whole sequence done in a specific time period.
Yeah, Darren, how challenging was that scene for you?
It was tricky. I was just going to mention. I remember one of the hardest calculations was, we built a giant steel 3-wall cyc. So a giant process screen, blue screen, kind of outdoor steel structure that could stand the weather and the wind in Atlanta. And we had to build this parking lot, or the top of the bridge. But just trying to figure out how far off the back wall so we wouldn't have shadows thrown from the wall onto the set. But in that time of year, so lots of calculations, figuring out where the sun's going to be at that time of year, which direction this cyc had to be built. how far off the wall so the shadows wouldn't fall on it, or the minimum amount of shadows that would fall onto the set throughout the day. It's just a really, really tricky, complicated kind of setup. It wasn't a hard thing to build. It was more just to make sure we put it in the right spot. We built the walls at the right height. We had enough room to work around it. And then that all had to be torn down, and that became Happy's apartment at the end of the movie too, the giant courtyard. So that was this giant basic playground that we built for the studio, which was it's a really amazing resource for them. But it was amazing. That was the other thing I wanted to mention is I've never seen a lighting rig more impressive in my life than what Mauro put together and his team put together for Happy's apartment. It was enormous. I don't know how big those two cranes were, but there was two construction cranes that build skyscrapers, basically, that were dangling two gigantic lighting rigs over this exterior set to give it that Long Island City, that illuminated city feel. But it was just so impressive. I mean, I don't know what the specs were, Mauro, on those lighting packages, but I got pictures of those things. I'd never been on a set that had that much.
Can you talk to us about that lighting rig since we're on it, Mauro?
The night exterior, at Happy's, that was such a massive light. It's true, it was massive. But, the thing was, I mean, there's a huge sequence there with interactive lighting, explosions, and, the Green Goblin comes back in, and there's like green explosions and not regular explosions, not just like pyro explosions. But so the lighting rig had to like incorporate all of that into it. Because we weren't just dealing with like, just lighting a night exterior. We had to account for like, what are the effects here? What's going to happen when Green Goblin explodes through the front window? What's going to happen when the Sandman creates this hurricane? And what happens when Electro has like this like electric shock and the whole building is sort of in this state of like so. I think a lot of that had, we had to have interactive lighting along with, the lights that were just lighting the night exterior. And so everything became huge, when you're dealing with that element alone. And, lucky we do have the resources on a film like this. And the crew was just amazing as far as like the pre-rig crew and the main crew and keeping everything moving. I mean, it was mind-blowing. I know at one point we decided that we were filming a lobby and it was all just exposed to light, and we decided we were going to just make a blue screen instead of, just surround the place in blue screen so we're able to film in the daytime instead of, filming the whole sequence at night. It would be better for everybody, We could do certain things. We could hide what we were doing inside the set because a lot of people didn't want to expose to the world what we were doing. So all of a sudden we made this sort of change. We decided to do a night interior and surround the whole place with blue screens. And the crew completely, reacted on it. And within, the next day we had blue screens surrounding the place. And we were able to film it that way. It was massive, huge. Yeah. So... a lot really, I have to thank this the very impressive and incredible crew to be able to have been able to do that. Because just having the idea is just one thing, but actually, creating it is another.
Well, the film is fantastic. Box office loves it. Critics love it. It's just such a success. You guys did an amazing job. So thank you so much for coming on Go Creative Show to talk to us all about it. We really appreciate it.
Thank you very much for having us.
Thank you.
All right, I want to thank production designer Darren Gilford and cinematographer Mauro Fiore from Spider-Man No Way Home. Thank you guys so much for being on the show. I learned a ton, so I hope you all out there did as well. So please let us know what you think of the show. We love your feedback and certainly love your questions. We used a ton of them in this episode because they were great. So for all of you that gave us questions, thank you. And we really do appreciate that. I also want to thank Filmmakers Academy for sponsoring this episode. Filmmakers Academy, master your craft at filmmakersacademy.com. And of course, I want to thank Connor Crosby from Ignition Visuals. He produces the show and puts it all together. And Dave Siegel mixes, masters, and makes the show sound so good. You can find him at siegelsound.com. gocreativeshow.com. Please don't forget, follow us on your favorite podcast app and hit subscribe so you never miss an episode, as well as Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube, where you can not only hear the episode, but see it. All things Go Creative Show at gocreativeshow.com. And of course, you can follow me on Instagram at Ben Consoli, BenConsoli. Thank you all for joining us today, and we will see you next week on another episode of the Go Creative Show, a podcast for filmmakers.